just heard Tracy too, and I was like, I'm not missing something.
Check, check.
All good. Sweet. Straighten these chairs out.
Yep. Some pretty.
Yes. Okay. Double check.
Yeah, these tall bistros look nice from it. Yeah, it's, well, if we had wireless, it would look nice, you know? We don't want to. I'm gonna go check some of the other rooms.
got to be innovative. Survive in this industry. You're dependent on the weather. You're very dependent on what Mother Nature wants. To be a farmer and make it, you got to be innovative.
And then it should show up there once you go into presentation. Yeah. Windows 8, you gotta go full into like control panel, sound, choose your device, set it into the volume. Windows 10 really, at this point, major improvement. If that quick little, button on the sound thing. Yeah, don't click it again. Click it once and wait. One of my other, it's much more basic.
To be a farmer and make it, you got to be innovative.
Setting up the VPN. In Windows 10, it's like, here's my dream.
In order to survive in this industry. You're
Another two don't have.
Once we get going after this, then I can tell you what's going to do it. After the video, yeah, let's get the first slides going and then we'll get, okay. Okay, everybody. And in order. So dates on the end.
It's like the bottom of a ship, right?
So it should be.
Which end? Doesn't matter. I'll do it here.
First, no, first, yeah, first, or yeah, no, you're good. You're okay there, yeah, there we go.
Wow, I feel like I'm in some sort of panel.
It's a Senate inquiry.
Senate, yeah. No.
You know me, I'm here to
Further questions, Your Honor.
You told me not to.
You've never been a member. Exactly. What'd you say? You're a communist?
Are we wearing masks up here or not?
No, you can take it off when you speak.
Okay.
Take it off from here, does that work? Sam, can I take
So
it
do
out
we
from
just
here?
sit here and speak?
okay to take it out
I
from
assume we're not getting on.
I don't know.
Up front. I assume we just sit
Who's
here and
active?
speak?
Who's turning this light?
Chicken off? What time is it?
Well, for soon to find out.
Good morning, everybody. It's on, right? I can hear it. I'm Linda Nunzig, Snohomish County Agriculture Coordinator, and I'm a farmer up in Arlington. I'd like to introduce our panel here. We have Kurt Steck, we have Dan Maycock, Steve Mantle, and Nate Krause, and they'll introduce themselves a little bit more as we get into our discussion here today. The 5G Food Resiliency Project is a project that came amazingly fast, and it is an amazing story of how everyone came together in a very short period of time to do work that would have taken a very, very long time. But how everybody took their hats off and jumped in to make this happen. With COVID and the first part of the pandemic, I was brought into the Emergency Operations Center for Snohomish County because all of a sudden there were demands for food that nobody knew how to resolve. How do we get food immediately to the food banks when we don't have it? We have all these schools that are set up for lunches for kids, but they're hot lunches where you go in and you sit down and you eat lunch. We need to totally pivot and come up with grab-and-go lunches. But yet no one knew how to make that happen. So working in food systems and doing all of this work, it's just a phone call. But what we realized also, and many of you already know this, how incredibly fragile our food system is. We live and work it every day, right? So we know how easy it is for this system to collapse, for it to break, for trucks to not go, for product to not move. And we had to pivot our food system, right? We went from wholesale sales to increased direct marketing sales. So we did pretty well, you know, as farmers making this happen. But then it also really showed what we're lacking in agricultural production. And a lot of that's technology. And I didn't realize it until I met all of them, what is capable for agriculture. And we're small farmers, right? We're not giant farmers, you know, doing hectares of land or sections of land. So how do we bring this technology to farms that are the sizes that we farm? Is it even something that's possible? And what I learned is that it is, and the impact that this technology can make on our farms. So Snohomish County Executive Dave Summers saw the importance of this and saw the opportunity. So when the CARES funding came down, the first round of funding to government, they said, we need to take care of our food system. We need to move our food system to the next level. We need to be ready. And they allocated $1 million to go into high tech in agriculture. Let's put this together. Let's preserve our food system. Let's take it to the next level and make sure it's going to be here into the future. This group of people over here worked miracles to make all of this happen, because the idea started in October. We had to have that $1 million spent January 1st, because that's when it ran out. So the things that had to happen in that short period of time would blow anybody's mind, but it did. And it was pretty amazing. So I want to first play this video for you, which really gives some context. Thank you, Nicole.
Where's the clicker? To be a farmer and make it, you got to be innovative in order to survive in this industry. You're very dependent on the weather. You're very dependent on what Mother Nature wants to bring you.
They kind of said, if you dream it, we can make it happen. So I'm like, well, I got all kinds of dreams, so let's see what we can do.
If we lose these farms, we lose our food security. Every time a piece of land goes out of production, it's heartbreaking, because we can never replace that land. That land becomes a subdivision. It becomes a strip mall. And to keep these farms here, they have to be economically viable.
The commercial side of rural America doesn't have that access to the data and the applications and the infrastructure that could help them become a lot more efficient. The stuff we take for granted is not something that these farmers get to enjoy, because in many cases, they're just precluded from access to the internet.
What we hope to do here is democratize that technology for farmers.
Getting to a point where they can use data to inform a more efficient approach will enable them to be more competitive and ultimately enable them to set up the farm so that they can pass it on to the next generation.
Technology can be really exciting, but it's only as valuable as the outcomes, right, that we can help drive for the communities that are leveraging this technology.
Whether it's a small boutique farm or it's a large commercial farm or somewhere in between. This project provides the information that they need to be economically viable.
So the vision behind what we're doing here is to try to bring together entrepreneurs, industry partners, public and private institutions, and really bring the expertise to solve real world problems. One of the things that we have to do as part of that is to bring growers and farmers who actually are living this every day and have the real problems, and start working with technology companies so that you can build solutions that are actually meaningful and will deliver value.
In order for the American farmer to survive, we have to improve our efficiencies in our operations. We have to figure out a way to produce more food on less acres.
Nature is complex, it's dynamic, it's different every day. There is no industry comparable to farming in terms of the potential volume and effective use of data. But there's also no industry that has been further disconnected from data than farming. We're here to open the door.
Snohomish County is a county of about 850,000 people. We're the next county north of Seattle and King County. We're an extremely diverse county in terms of geographies and industries, businesses, and people. Seattle region and Puget Sound region is really known for the innovation that's happened here. We've got, Microsoft and Amazon and just amazing companies doing cutting-edge work in technology and information management. At some point, you have to have cross-fertilization with the people that can use those tools. Linda Nunzig is just an amazing employee, has been with Snohomish County for a number of years. She has a farm up in the north part of the county, so she knows the business and the industry and the people and the language and the needs. It actually generated out of Linda talking with the agricultural community and thinking about some of the just amazing technology and how they might be applied to agriculture.
One key piece that we learned through COVID is how fragile our food system is. As the CARES funding started settling in, it became an opportunity to really secure our food system.
One of the things that we've become aware of through COVID was that there's an issue of resiliency in our food supply chain. It all starts on places like this farm. Growers are interrupted in what they're doing, if distributors are disrupted in terms of what they're doing and getting our food supply to us because of issues like COVID, what we want to do is to bring technology out to them to try to alleviate some of those problems and be predictive and avoid some of those problems so that there's no disruptions to our food supply chain.
Linda Nunzig contacted me. What she was asking me was, would you be willing to bring technology out to the farm and see if we can, change the way we do things around here and learn from it as well.
She explained it as, providing high-speed internet and access to it in rural areas, which is great because we really don't have any except for whatever we get through our cell phones. I'm excited about it to see what they come up with and see how it can change, how it can make my operation better.
Every industry is important, but I can't think of one that's more important than agriculture. It's our sustainability. It's one of the industries that has not seen as much innovation from a data perspective. And for smaller farmers and for larger farmers, just that access today will have a meaningful impact to their bottom line.
So all this is brand new. In fact, it was in January of 2020 that the FCC finally flipped the switch and said, okay, we can use this band commercially.
We're providing real help to optimize businesses with spectrum that the government specifically wanted to see this kind of innovation.
Doing it at a real farm is going to give us an actual set of conditions to test this technology out at and make sure when it does go to market at this scale, we've tested it in a real environment, not just simply in someone's backyard.
You look at the brands behind it. They're industry-leading, really powerful brands that, if they wanted to, could probably try and say, hey, we're going to solve this problem themselves. But actually, they've said, if we work together, we solve the problem faster and we solve the problem in a better way. So that's pretty monumental.
What you're seeing is that combination of big companies and small startups. The big companies have the ability to bring those platforms, to bring capabilities, tools, foundations for innovation. Those are things that many startups don't have. They don't have access to big licenses or platforms or hardware or bandwidth or antennas. 5G Oil is really bringing those capabilities to startups.
At T-Mobile, we are building a 5G network that'll reach all Americans. But we also know this is something that is much bigger than ourselves, and that's why we're excited to be part of the Food Resiliency Project.
It's all about taking the tribal knowledge of the farmer and the technology people. You have to find ways to integrate and communicate, building tools and systems to help people who are doing God's work to get this done, really just making it happen.
These technologies are going to power things like smart farms, smart hospitals, smart cars, smart factories. So Microsoft is a big believer in those technologies. But we also know that there's a lot of work to be done, and the best way to do that is to get out on the farm, so to speak, and do some real-life test cases. To survive, farms need to be efficient, and that means they need access to the latest technology, including, connected solutions.
When we talk about farm to table, this is really technology to farm to table. You really complete the circle. When everybody worried about our health, everybody worried about food scarcity, when we started at this 5G Open Innovation Lab, we have this notion that it takes a village. It's really an entire chain that comes together. this is probably the best way that we can give back to the society.
When you look at 5G together with edge computing, these are building blocks that other industries are using. A lot of what we're learning here as far as building a infrastructure, a platform for use case delivery, and those use cases are going to be across a spectrum of verticals. Whatever we learn here is definitely going to be able to be applied across other industries.
We're out in a real county with real farms, building real networks and starting to run real use cases. And I think that's the really exciting thing. This is not just a lab exercise. This is, let's get out there, let's just make this work.
Today, it's the good that we do with technology, and it's the change that we bring about in the world. And the 5G Open Innovation Lab is that venue.
The potential of having technology on your farm and learning from that technology is going to be a huge plus for us.
When you look at data, you don't know what's going to come out of the data. All you know is you do that data, you go through it, and sometimes you're surprised, and that creates real value. So that's what we're hoping to do.
Your farmers are the most innovative people you will ever meet. If something's broken, they will figure out how to fix it. And that's really not any different than the technology world. They see a problem and they fix a problem. So it's going to be really exciting to see how these two worlds marry and the respect that we know they're going to have for each other and what they do. It's a very exciting time for agriculture and for technology.
What are you excited for your kids?
With my kids, and you're going to make me teary-eyed, actually, tell you the truth. With my kids, I remember being with my dad and seeing his innovation and seeing him trying new things. And they can say, hey, you know, their dad also tries new things. And I really feel like we can be a great example to what this has the potential to do.
Hi, can you hear me? Perfect. All right, how do I move my slides forward?
Nicole, where is it?
I'll go ahead and start. So hi, my name is Kurt Steck, and I'm with this group called the 5G Open Innovation Lab. And so what is that, right? Essentially, I like to think of it as a bridge, right? And so at the end of the day, we built this ecosystem where we were able to bring together some of the leading technology companies from a global perspective, right? So Dell, Intel, Microsoft, F5, Amdocs, you know, the list goes on and on. And the reason we did that is a lot of those companies struggle to understand how do they do problem solving? How do their technologies actually get to solving real problems? And so the 5G Open Innovation Lab, quite honestly, is a bridge for those technology companies to engage at a relatively local level, right? And so how do we bring them out to a farm like this in Snohomish County to start problem solving, right? And that's really what the 5G Open Innovation Lab is, that we're sponsored by those companies to create these test environments where they can come out and figure out, by working with folks like Steve and Dan, who are actually building solutions for farmers and growers on their technologies and on their platforms, to work directly with them, but more importantly, to work with growers and farmers to understand the problem so that what they're actually building is solving real world problems. Right, so you look at this, and you guys are probably all familiar with solutions that you might see on the right-hand side of this, right? It's all this future stuff about ag tech development, digital transformation of the ag industry. All that is really, really important. But what's really important on this is to understand that this is producing, do I just move it forward? Right, this is producing data, right? And you probably heard the word data in that video no less than about 20 different times, right? And so this is what's really important to understand, that all this technology, right, whether they're sensors in the soil, ag stations, or weather stations, or what Steve will show you later on, LiDAR or imagery capture, right, it's all producing massive amounts of data. And I wanted to show this slide a little bit just to understand the context of how much data is being created in the world today, right? So if you look at this, back in 2010, right, there was 2 zettabytes of data. Anybody know what a zettabyte of data is, right? It's 100, down below, if you look at it, it's 1 trillion gigabytes of data, right? So you start looking about the growth of this. In 2020, we're up to 64 zettabytes of data in the world. That's projected to go to 181 zettabytes of data. Anybody know what anybody drive a Tesla? Right? Right? You know what a Tesla produces every year? Right? 300 terabytes of data from a Tesla. Now, as we move forward, all cars are going to be that way, right? So the amount of sensors and technology that are going into cars is just another example of data is being created everywhere, right? And you saw those solutions that I talked about earlier, whether it's autonomous driving tractors, right? Sensors, some of the imagery capture stuff that Steve will show later on, it's all producing data, right? And the biggest problem we have today is that our networks, right, don't support that data. And the advent of 5G, and what's really, really important here, is if you start thinking about forward, is when you start looking at the 5G networks, right, all this data is moving forward. Well, the networks and the underlying infrastructure have to continue to evolve with it to be able to support the application. So an application like Steve will show later on that might capture 10 terabytes of data running up and down 100 acres of a farm needs to be transported after it's acquired, pushed back into a data center, right, into Microsoft's world or AWS's or Google's world to be processed and then transported back out to an application, right? That's very, very expensive, right, to go do today. And so that doesn't actually work to actually unlock the potential of Steve's application because the costs of doing that are going to be prohibitive in the future as Steve continues to try to scale out his applications. So there's some underlying blockers that exist in the marketplace to move this forward. So what happens with 5G, right? And everybody thinks that, you know, we're working on 5G. Everybody have 5G on their phones yet? Anybody see that little moniker come up on their cell phones? All right? The challenge it was with 5G, but the beauty of what 5G potentially is that 5G looks just like cloud computing, right? So the architecture that are being built on these 5G networks starts to look like and have some of the same capabilities as a cloud network from Google, from Microsoft, from AWS. What that means is that those networks can now process data in a very different way. It brings it forward into the world of compute, right? And this is really, really important because you start to get into this world called edge computing. And if you haven't heard that term, the 5G lab is really all about the world of edge computing. We talk about 5G as an enabler to that, but what we're trying to do is to bring some of those capabilities that exist in these big compute networks further and further out into the network, right? So this is what's called edge computing. And this is really, really important is because you start seeing technologies like containers and Kubernetes. These are the things that are the underpinnings of applications that Dan and Steve are writing. You'll see those a little bit later on. But it's really, really important that we start to bring those capabilities forward because it's all about how we're going to manage all this data in the future, but in a way that's cost effective and in a way that delivers real solutions to growers and farmers. But the same technology is being applied to many industries in their futures. So we're working with ports, we're working with manufacturing companies, we're working with all these different industries to try to figure out how does this technology come to bear in such a way that it's going to unlock the potential of data. Because right now, we're slow. So this is what the 5G Open Lab is about in the ecosystems, is this idea that we're bringing together entrepreneurs and startups who are driving the next generation of solutions to solve problems for different industries, together with these leading technology companies, and together with people like Nate, that you'll see later on, and growers to get together to solve these problems and unlock some of these issues. And what's typically going to happen is, anybody live in a rural area? Does anybody have bad cell coverage? Right? Probably a lot of us and stuff like that. Well, one of the challenges we have is that those big companies, whether it's AT&T or Verizon or T-Mobile, who deliver those cellular services that could potentially bring this capability to us, when they build their networks, right, when they get into rural areas, they're actually not trying to serve the rural area. What they're trying to serve is the people who are coming from metropolitan areas that are driving over those highways, right? And so what you'll see, and this has been going on for 35 years, because I was in the wireless industry 35 years ago, what you see is that they basically drive down the highways and they point their cell towers down the highways and they get a little spillover. And what they're required as part of their licenses is to cover a certain population in the percentages of a town like Prosser, right? Or even in Ellensburg, right? So what happens is they drive that technology in a way, they cover their pops, they meet their specifications for having that license, but they're not trying to serve that local community. And in a lot of ways, they never reach out into the growing and farming communities in those regions, right? That problem hasn't changed in 35 years. So the reason they don't do that is that they don't look at those markets and see the opportunity to create business around the industry that's thriving in those rural areas, right? So part of this is what I call the chicken and the egg problem, right? So until we use a lab and we start showing them what's capable, right, and all the data that can be created around which they can create a business, right? It's hard for them to justify why they would go put cell towers in rural areas to create the kind of capabilities that these networks can bring. So part of what the lab is all about is not only helping growers and farmers, but it's also trying to address some of the business issues that are inhibitors for those cell phone companies to start building their networks out in those rural areas. And if they start seeing the opportunity from a business perspective through applications like Dan and Steve will highlight a little bit later on that actually deliver value to a grower based upon data, right? The whole economic model doesn't create a flywheel effect for them to extend their coverage out, right? And this is the problem that we've had, is that we've been trying to subsidize rural cell phone coverage for the better part of 35 years, and it really hasn't changed, right? Because the mindset hasn't been there to go drive it in a way that creates a business from technology based upon data that's delivering value to growers. And so we're stuck in this bad cycle. So part of what the lab and our mission here is around farming and growing is to create a test environment where folks like Steve can come in, build applications using the latest technology, deliver value, show that value, but to prove out that there's a business case for these carriers to start pushing this stuff further and further out into the networks. I'm being told here. So this is what the Precision Agricultural Lab is really all about, is to creating that environment, bringing all those people together to problem solve, right? And this is a long-term play. This isn't going to be solved overnight. We're going to continue to push this. But what I want to do now is to hand it over to Dan, who's going to come in and start talking about, well, what are these networks doing and what kind of solutions are they enabling that ultimately are going to create that value and get the flywheel going.
So quick introduction on us. I'm a CEO or co-founder of Loftus Labs. We do data consulting for the ag industry. So Loftus Labs comes from Loftus Ranches, which is the, I think, 4th or 5th largest top farm in the world. We also grow apples and a bunch of other commodities. We realized huge opportunity to provide what we did with data consulting for our farm for the rest of the ag industry. So we spun off a company this year called Loftus Labs, and we go out and do data work for farmers. So the big focus around us, working with individuals that have small to medium-sized farms. Larger farms tend to have their own data teams. But we'll typically go in and really focus on making better decisions faster. At the end of the day, we talk a lot about lasers and drones and ATVs and all the other cool gadgets out there. But at the end of the day, a farmer has to make better decisions faster. They're not going to be able to keep farming. So our entire focus of our company is to just help facilitate the decision-making process. At the end of the day, it's looking to 12 to 18-month turnarounds on investment. So we can engage with the farmer within a year. We want to see that they're using the tools and they basically paid for us, right? And so we're not necessarily focused on 10 to 15, 20-year payouts or far out tech. It's more practical around labor, around water, around insects, inputs, all those types of things. And when we think about when it comes down to ag tech, right, we're looking for near-term returns. There is market disruptors and things, kind of a farm of the future concept that's absolutely focused on several years out. But we think about, complexity and return. We're looking for quick wins along the way. So you're someone that's struggling with labor, you got Excel spreadsheets, you're dealing with an Access database. How do we help facilitate and automate that process while looking for farther out stuff around 5G connectivity and autonomous farming, the concept of precision ag, which we absolutely have to build too, but also have to focus on what those near-term wins are as well. And when we talk about endeavors like this, it is important we keep an eye on the future and where things are headed, but farmers have to be able to pick up something in the next 12, 18, 24 months and use it as well. When we talk about data or anything else, it's important we kind of keep that piece in mind when we work with customers. And it's a big focus around what we focused on with this effort here at the farms. So we think about a typical data architecture. It doesn't matter how big of a company you are. I work with farms that have thousands of acres. I personally have 10 acres, right? And it doesn't matter if you are 5, 10, 15, 50, 5,000 acres. Your architecture is going to have transactions, the work I do. I ingest that data, I store it somewhere, I prep it, and I model it out. And when we think about how a farm would use that same information, we work a lot with commercial apple growers. They have packing houses, orchards, they have back office information. And we see a lot of technology being used today where a farmer is going to sit at their computer screen, load up 15 different screens with 15 different pieces of information. My spray is here, my labor is there, my yield's there, my packing is there, and try to rectify and tie all that together. And it get pretty overwhelming if I have a whole lot of point solutions staring at me in the face and I'm trying to figure out per acre how much money did I make? Or if I'm dealing with irrigation issues, how do I manage my X number of acres just around water and try to make sense of all that? And so where we see a lot of technology going across the top there is it takes several different types of people to pull something like this together. And if you're a U-pick farm, a small yield farm, if you're not dealing with that many acres, you're not going to hire a small army of folks to come in and leverage that. So a big part of what we look at with this initiative and what we work with the 5G Open Innovation Lab on is how do we build services and technologies that allow anyone to leverage those capabilities using a bunch of different kinds of products, tying my information together on the left side there, stick it in one spot, and then make use of it. And we kind of look at 4 different kinds of ways to use data. We have descriptive analytics, which just describes how I'm using that data. Diagnostic analytics, saying, hey, this particular plot of land didn't produce as high as before. Why is that the case? Predictive analytics, forecast out 5 to 7 years in the future. If I'm going to grow a whole bunch of new apple trees, for example, I got to look years out in the future before they're ready to go. And then prescriptive analytics, which is where I'm leveraging things like machine learning and AI, which isn't as far out as one might think. We use technology like that for pooling, where a packing house pulls in apples from a whole bunch of different growers in order to analyze when do we cut off these pools and who gets paid when. But if I'm able to build out these tools and technologies in a cost-effective way, looking to where this can evolve and grow in the future, but in the near term, how do I get something valuable to the farmer within the next 12 months, right? That's really what our focus is. And so it takes a lot of the science projects and high tech, makes it very practical and real. And that was a big focus of folks that do farm, where it's great to be able to try stuff out and look ahead several years out. But if I'm not getting something beneficial to me right here and now, it's not going to do me a whole lot of good. So with that, I'm going to talk about Steve and some of the near-term stuff that we've been able to do with this initiative and how a lot of these concepts come to light in a very practical and real way.
Thanks, Dan. Hey, Steve Mantle. It's great to be here with you guys this morning. Came out from Walla Walla. Dan came out from Yakima, Tieton, right? Other side of the mountains. And it's always fun working on this side of the mountains on ag. So glad to be here today. So Innovate Ag, we're based out of Walla Walla, and our focus really is on unlocking ag productivity, predominantly on orchards and vineyards. And helping growers to grow more in fewer acres using less resources. And those resources can vary from inputs on labor, on nutrients, and on water, and that's part of what we're talking through today. So our solution is really bringing together all these different data sources. And what we found when we sat down with growers, when we founded the company a couple of years ago, is that they were often using 10, 15, we had some growers saying that they had 19 different apps that they were looking at, trying to make sense of their business. And it really gave me a lot of empathy for everything that's facing you between payroll and looking at different weather sources and looking at various other predictions, prices. It's a lot to really all take in. And so our focus ultimately is to bring that down into a way where we consolidate data from a combination for us predominantly around agricultural-based imagery and IoT or Internet of Things sensors, just a fancy way of saying soil sensors, various environmental sensors, weather sensors, bringing that together in a way that is relatable to a grower and ultimately is going to help them on having a good economic outcome and visualizing that. And so really what it boiled down to when we initially started on this is we worked with all sorts of different types of sensors, started on this in a smart orchard project out in Eastern Washington. And there was still just a lot of noise on the data, and we took a step back and said, well, what does a grower ultimately lose sleep about at night? It's often what's your yield going to be? What's your outcome going to be at the end of the year? And how do you think about that? Well, it's watering and what's going into the soil, what's the state of the soil, disease, what's that risk look like? And so we really doubled down on soil mapping. And as we talk to growers, for those that were taking soil samples and looking at what their nutrient analysis is and so on, you should typically take a sample, maybe 1 or 2 per 20 acres. I'll ask maybe here, who here took soil samples this last year and sent them into a lab? Half a dozen of you. And so when you did that, did you take that on 20-acre basis, 1 acre, 100 acres? What did that look like? Somebody just yell it out. 5 acres. So you took 1 per 5 acres? Okay, that's great. Anybody in the back? 100 acres. 1 per 100 acres. A couple per 100 acres. And did you take those and put them all into the same bag and send it to the lab, or did you break them out separately? It just depends. It depends on the field. Fair enough. And so what we found for growers is giving them a more granular view of what's in the soil from a texture perspective, as well as from a nutrient perspective, really can matter, particularly for your high-value crops where there's a lot of variability. For some of the growers in Eastern Washington, it was just actually out in Wenatchee area last week and working with a large grower. In one 40-acre field, the amount of sand in areas ranged from 5% to 90% in the same field. High degree of variability. So what do they do with that? Well, they end up with yield being all over the place. And how ultimately what a grower wants to get toward is uniformity in your crop, right? And so this is part of the focus, is using data and the underlying infrastructure that's being provided with folks in the 5G Open Innovation Lab to collect that data and bring that back to a grower in a way that they can do something with. And so we use technology from a company called Soil Optics. It's a spectrometer. It goes on the front of an ATV, or could even go on a truck, and drive it up and down orchard or vineyard rows, or Nate and I drove around, and his kids drove around in pumpkin fields and strawberry fields and out in Andrews Hay. It was an eye-opening experience for Linda and I, as we did it after manure had been applied. It took some serious hosing down on that ATV afterwards, I'll say that much. And my wife didn't let me in the house for a day or two. I don't know what it was. It wasn't that bad. You're used to it. Right, so anyway, with that, it was really about mapping down into 335 points per acre as to what that looks like. So the spectrometer picks up gamma rays that are naturally emitting from the soil. This technology was developed out of the Netherlands initially, and then used up in Canada for mining, ultimately finding different deposits of minerals, and that's effectively what you're looking at when it comes to nutrients in the soil, effectively, right? And so now a grower can end up with, a much more granular view. So we take that, and we'll look at one of his fields here in a minute on the orchard side, and you can use that to make irrigation decisions. And anybody in here have soil moisture sensors? 2, 3 of you have soil moisture sensors out there, right? They can be game-changing, and really thinking about what's in your soil and what's that look like. The challenge is you often don't really know where you place those soil moisture sensors. Is that truly representative of your field, right? Particularly for some of them don't have a whole lot of variability, some do. And so by doing that, by mapping this out, you now have a view of what's my texture distribution, and let's go place a soil moisture sensor in a place that is really representative of one extreme versus the other extreme, and then make decisions accordingly. And so with Nate, and actually out at Andrews Hay, we use that data to place soil moisture probes in representative locations, and then those soil moisture probes are measuring the moisture level at 4-inch levels all the way down to 2 feet. And so as you can see in that step 3, part of what Nate looks at is the percolation rate, as it's called. Each of those lines represents 4 inches further down in the soil. And you can see, as you see those spikes, it kind of look like an EKG or a heart monitor. All it is really when you have a watering event, and can subsequently tell, great, what do I need to do? And so what a grower optimizes toward is really about the 3rd or 4th line down. How do I not move down at the 20-inch or so level? I don't really care about watering down below the root zone. Why would I want to do that? I'm flushing my nutrients and all that good stuff past the root zone. And so it's about optimizing around that. And then over time, when and if you're ready for it, automating that irrigation. And the way that Andrews Hay did this already is he hasn't gone all the way to automated irrigation, but he was spending about half an hour or more a day driving back and forth to turn his pumps on. Any of you do that? Yeah, okay, right? And so he said, we're getting tired of this. Is there anything I can do to get me back at home earlier to tuck the kids in at night? And so he now has the capability to look at basically the percolation rate across his different alfalfa fields that he has. And now he can turn that pump on or off without having to even go and touch it. And so it saves him half an hour a day times 7. So that's 2+ hours. No, yeah, no, 5.5 hours, 3.5 hours. I can do this. 3.5 hours basically a week at a minimum that he gets back in doing that. So if we take a quick look at what some of Nate's soil maps look like, across the top, so this is for his orchard, and you can see now how we have this map. You look at the sand one in the middle. So the red color in the top center section there it represents 50 to 60% sand. And then the blue represents 29 to 35% sand. So he's got actually quite a bit of variability there that he has to deal with, that he knew was there, but wasn't really able to pinpoint exactly where it was. And I'll let him talk about that a little bit in a minute.
Steve, does that across like about 8 to 10 acres, would you say?
What are you, your orchard is 5 acres or so.
It's not big.
Only 5 acres, you have that level of variability. Yes, absolutely. You can see the elevation piece. It always is interesting when I talk to farmers on the other side of the state and they say, really, the elevation's 3 feet? Well, that's what you guys are dealing with over here, right? You're at sea level more or less. So he's got 3 to 12 feet. And then you can see the pH distribution. He's actually done a really great job on the pH in that it's moderately tight at 6.15 to 6.9, but it gives him a bit of an idea on where there's some variability and where he can manage toward bringing that even closer together. And then we take a look at, well, what's the nitrogen distribution looks like? And we took this, we were saying earlier, it was in April? It's about April, I think we did this run while we were bumping around on that ATV. And so it ranges from 33 to 66 pounds per acre there on the left. Gives him an idea where he ultimately can refresh this data by going out and taking soil samples. To get this data, we took 3 soil samples, it was 3 soil samples in the 5 acres. Normally, we would take about, in a 20 acres, we would take about 3 soil samples, but this is a smaller acreage. And in the future, he no longer needs an ATV to go out with this sensor to go out and map it. It's done once. The gamma ray natural emission from the soil doesn't really change much over time. So in 5 or 6 years, we might need to go and refresh itself. But you go and take samples, again, at those 3 specific locations, send it into a lab, and then the maps get refreshed, and you can see how the nitrogen the fertilizer distribution basically changes over time. In apples, and part of what Nate focuses on is calcium and magnesium. More specifically, you can see a bit of variability going on there as well. On calcium from 1,500 parts per million up to 23. And then phosphorus and potassium, you can see there as well. Now, it's not all about the soil, as Nate will tell you. About part of what he does is foliar application as well. It's all about making sure that it's plant available and the plant can uptake this. So that's a little bit of a backdrop on the soil mapping capability where we brought that together. And again, it was about collecting all of this data and then moving it up to the cloud for processing and then providing it back in a view that's actionable for Nate and Andrew. Now, on the next slide, if it moves, if I hit this again, there we go. And is it going to start auto-playing? This is basically another sensor that we have on the back of that ATV, where it uses something called LiDAR. Some of you are familiar with everybody in here is actually familiar with LiDAR, you just may not realize it. LiDAR is technology that's often used on the front of vehicles on your car where you've got adaptive cruise control. It's basically sending kind of a scattering of laser up ahead of you and then adapting your cruise speed. You're doing the same darn thing on the back of this where it's basically using it to map things out. The newer iPhones as well have an actually built-in LiDAR sensor. If you want to have fun with it, download a little app called Polycam. It's really fun, and you can literally map out parts of a room. It's an architect's dream. Anyway, we use that to map out his orchard, which you see here. And if I click on this, I think it'll start playing. Maybe. Yes. Okay. So probably hard to see from the back of the room, but effectively what we're showing is how many apples there are on each tree and each image, basically. And so the darker colors are where he has more apples. The lighter colors are where he has less. Over on the right-hand side is where he has younger plantings. And so obviously those are lower numbers that are showing there. And now we're actually looking at not just the count of the apples, but we're looking at the height of the trees and the distribution of the height of those trees. And it can better understand, well, where do I have the trees that have grown a little higher? Where do I need to lean in a little bit, perhaps in terms of nutrients and so on, to help catch them up with each other? And then this view, we're looking at, we can look at the area of trees, and then this is actually taking us to a view where it's showing we're driving 20 miles per hour up and down these rows. This is one of the photos that's actually taken of the apples. Each of those red boxes, and this is where artificial intelligence and machine learning come in, is indicating a count of an apple. And then we actually measure the size of each of those squares. Each of those squares then can actually say, all right, well, here's what your size distribution, Nate, is of apples. And so earlier on in the season, he could use that to say, all right, well, here's where I have trees that are growing a little bit, the apple's a little bit smaller, and here's where not. We're also seeing growers that are pruning based on this data year over year, as they see where there's something called biennialism, where they have, and Nate struggled with this a bit, I believe, where you can see, it'll be interesting this next year as we overlay on the next year's data, where are there areas where there are fewer apples year over year, and his goal will be to really even that out back to ultimately the end game of uniformity. So with all of that, as was mentioned earlier, you effectively end up with terabytes and terabytes of data basically that need to be moved up to the cloud. And that's why the 5G Open Innovation Lab, edge computing, all the technology that was spoken about earlier is really needed to help make this real. And I'm sure Nate will talk about before and after where he was on internet a year ago or so. It's hard to believe it's been a year already. But that's a quick summary of what we're doing. I'll hand it to Nate and talk about what all this technology means to him and where it's relevant and helpful.
Yeah. Thanks, Steve. Hey, thanks for coming here. This is nice to see everybody, and thanks these guys for including me into this project we have. When they came to me and they said technology, I kind of was like, a lot of other farmers probably feel the same. It's like, ooh, I don't really know if I want to really touch that and that sort of thing. But Linda, all the farmers in the valley kind of have this saying: is Linda says do something, you just do it. So that's where I ended up being in that spot. So anyways, but thanks guys, it's pretty good. Basically, if there's a lot of information that was put up here and it's pretty confusing. But to kind of give it in my perspective of what they've done and what this whole thing is about is basically they give me information and I make decisions with that information they give me, okay? And so basically that's what I'm doing. And a good example of that is before, so Swan Trail Farms is, we do pumpkins is our main thing is what we do. We just got done with it and I'm exhausted. And we do apples in the spring, or in September, and then we do strawberries in the spring, and then we do company picnics and weddings and that sort of stuff. That has nothing to do with farming. But anyways, but so what they gave me is an example of using data and information is for the watering. And watering is a huge deal. It's a huge deal for a lot of different places. Now for us, it's not a big deal. You can see the Snohomish River sits right there, and we can pump as much as we want out of that river and put it onto our crops. But for other places, if you think about it, watering, I was just talking to Dan about how in Eastern Washington they have problems with water, and they're having problems with, paint. They had to actually buy water, I believe, and I can't imagine buying water. It's hard enough for me to buy one of those, 16-ounce water things in there, but I can't imagine having to do that. And so we just threw water on like crazy our apples. We have no clue what we do with water. And, when we did it, we'd throw water on, and the old way of doing it is you dig a hole and you squeeze the soil and you see how much you have. If the plants don't look good, what do? You think you need more water, right? So we throw more water on it. So we're just blindly throwing water on it. With Steve and Innovate Ag, they gave us these water sensors, and I know there's different water sensors out there, but this one is really, really cool because it goes directly to my phone, and it goes right there to my phone, and they've really made it dummy-proof for me especially, and so I can take it and it'll say, hey, turn on the water, and then I'll be like, all right, turn on the water, and then it'll say, all right, turn off the water, all right, I'll turn off the water, and so it's made it really, really easy for someone like me who has no clue on the data end of it and this stuff up here that they're putting up, and being able to make that decision on when to turn it on, when to turn it off. And so what we found is that we have saved 60 to 70% on our water. Instead of, we used to go like 12 hours every 3 or 4 days, we'd turn the water on. We have really sandy soil. You saw how quickly it drains through there. So we were thinking we need a lot. We're down to about 3 hours, I think it was, every 4 days or so. So, I mean, that's a huge difference. And for us, again, we have water, not a big deal. But if you think about these other places that can really use this information and this type of technology integrated with the soil optics and everything else, it could be a really big thing because, there's a lot less land and there's more people coming in, and how are we gonna make more food on less amount of ground? And so being this precision and being able to know exactly how much you put on your crops to make the best production, the best quality and everything else. And I could go into quality and everything else that we do have from this whole project, but it's just been a really good experience for me. And if you have any questions at all, I'll be happy to answer those at all, but that's kind of basically where my end of this whole thing has been. So, all righty.
Thanks, Nate. It's a pretty amazing team, isn't it? And the way that they all came together and everybody jumped in and said, we're just going to make it happen. And we're going to make it happen overnight. And, like you guys said, a year ago, we didn't even have anything on the ground. We were still running contracts because we're government, right? Everything is contracts. So we were running contracts and kind of over here trying to figure out who's who. And it is this amazing team that made all of that happen in an incredibly short period of time. But it was this team saying, we need to make this happen. This is an opportunity to truly make a difference in agriculture, agricultural production, and in the resiliency of our food system. So it has been incredibly exciting. We have 2 farms that were chosen, and they're very different farms. So we have Swans Trail Farm in Snohomish, And it is agritourism, it's apple production, and you heard him say strawberries and other things. And then we have a farm that's very different from that, and that's a commodity farm, and that's up in the Arlington area, Andrews Hay, and he's doing traditional commodity production. So how do we use both types of farms to learn as much as we can through this project and through this technology, and really being able to show that it works on both of them? So just a huge round of applause for them, please, because they are amazing. And with that, we can open it up for any questions that anybody has. Yes?
Nate, how did you use the nutrient data?
Well, the nutrient, do I talk in? The nutrient, well, when Steve came out and we could really pinpoint a lot of different areas at my field. So it's not just apples that we did. We have about 45 acres of pumpkins that we grow. We have strawberries, about 5 acres of strawberries that we grow as well. And so what we can do is in these different spots where, like, let's say my pumpkin production hasn't been the best. Why is this area not doing well? And it was really funny is when you look at those maps, and Steve can probably attest to this, is that you can tell the areas like where I filled in a ditch, a while back, and you can see that there's no nutrients in that area or even around it because the soil that we were moving and pushing in wasn't quite there. So we really, if it was really nice for me because I can pinpoint the areas where I need, nitrogen or my pH is too high. And so I can be more precise about where I'm fertilizing rather than just throwing out, and fertilizer I heard is like tripling or doubling this next year coming in because of the supply. I guess it's really bad. But so us to not have to really put on certain areas that we normally would just not knowing, again, just throwing it out there. So it goes back to that precision thing. It's way more precise. And Steve with Innovate, I can't say enough good things about him, even though he's just sitting right next to me here. But he really gives you information that you can use and apply, and then being able to develop that stuff and then take it and put it in different areas, different farms, which the CARES Act, that's what it was for, and to be able to advance agriculture in more of a precise way.
So then, what were your results of applying that information? Did you have better yield? Did you change the budget of your? For not so much the nutrients, because it'll take a while for that to kind of work into the soil. And so we're going to do another one coming up, just some soil samples and that sort of thing. And we'll get us a better idea. So we're not the nutrients itself, I haven't seen anything from, but I will say with the watering end of it, our apples, we used to get these huge apples, a lot to do with too much water. They'd have bad bitter pit. Bitter pit's something that, I don't know if you guys are familiar with it, but it's a calcium deficiency. We'd have a really bad bitter pit. And this year, our apples were way more size. The size of them were way nicer. The bitter pit, we didn't have nearly as much because of the water, not having too much water. The trees itself looked a lot better, and our yield was a lot higher due to a lot of the watering issues that we have. I think once we really dial in the nutrients, I think you might bite into the best apple you've ever tasted. So, yeah.
Other questions?
Is your software services subscription-based or is it license-based on IoT?
The question was, are we subscription-based or license-based on IoT, is that what you said? We are subscription-based. And so the question often is how many sensors do we need, right? And that's why it's important to map out the soil so you actually understand the variability. There's no real one size fits all. We need one per acre or one per 20 acre. It also depends on the value of the crop, right? So if you've got a lower value crop, then perhaps you don't need the density of sensors depending on what you're looking to accomplish. But the short answer is it's subscription based, and if you're putting in the sensors itself, you can either rent or buy the sensors, and then there's a subscription cost for the data to basically show up on your phone. Question is it scaled based on the number of devices? The short answer is yes, it would be based on the number of devices.
In the back there.
Are you going to be at the horticulture conference in December?
Yes, actually, thanks for asking. We will be at the horticulture show. Will you?
Yeah.
Good.
My manager, my son will be, yeah.
Fantastic. Yep. I'll be there. Dan, I think you're going to be there at the horticulture show in Yakima, the Sun Dome and Exhibition Center. I think it's the first full week of December and the beginning of the week. But yes.
Yep, 6th to the 8th.
Yeah.
In the back.
So I've noticed a lot of farms struggle with costs of finances, and it's hard enough just to pay for moisture probes. So how much would it cost to actually do the mapping, which would be great, and then install the probes?
Question is, how much would it cost to map out the acreage and then install the probes? Generally speaking, on the mapping piece, it is $30 an acre is what we charge with. It's typically more of a 50-acre minimum. However, I think and we mostly work over in Eastern Washington. But Nate has a number of farmers in the area that have expressed interest, so I think we could bundle it together and probably do away with a minimum. And then the other part of the question was around sensors.
Right, so what else comes with it? Map it, and what are the other services?
Yeah, I mean, what we didn't talk much about was for Nate, we also installed, or actually Washington State University installed Ag WeatherNet sensors. Do you want to talk a little bit about how that's been relevant for you?
So Washington State University has a weather station. I'm sure you guys have one near you. You've looked up before. They put one on our farm, and it's been good for us as far as it kind of correlate well with how much water we're getting, and then how much that you can kind of see the difference with your water sensors, and then how much water you're getting rained on. For us, mainly the biggest thing was apple burn, sunburn. Apples, especially Honeycrisp, which we grow, are real susceptible to sunburn. And so on that, and I wish I knew more about this, but on the weather station, there's a measure of UV rays, and they just told me, and like I said, they've made it really simple for me, is if it hits past 1,000, and I don't know what the measurement is, but if it hits past 1,000, that means I got to put the shade cloth or do some sort of cooling. Now, it doesn't seem like that's a big deal, but to put shade cloth on, it takes me about 2 days to do that. So if it's coming, I got to have that shade cloth up, and then I got to make sure I get it down. We're not really efficient in any means in any part of our farm, but that is a real thing that we need to work on as far. But that's where the weather stations kind of came in. So.
I think over time, the neat thing about WSU, and we actually haven't done a good job of talking about WSU's involvement with this project. It's been the fun thing is we had their Mount Vernon extension folk involved, both on the soil side as well as on the weather side, and subsequently brought in some engagement from their soil scientists and meteorologists. One of the nice things, and then I'll finish closing off on your question, on the weather stations tying into Ag WeatherNet, and if you do, I think it's just weather.wsu.edu, and you can basically, there's a couple different suppliers. To be clear, Innovate, for the most part, we're not focused on selling sensors or at all. Really a data-centric company and about bringing that all together. But if you go to weather.wsu.edu, there are a couple of different station providers on there. One of them is called Meter Group. Another one is called Davis Instruments that are recommended weather stations that can tie into AgWeatherNet. And then as part of AgWeatherNet, you can see growing degree days. And then even, I think one of the things Nate will start looking at this next year is where there are insect pressures, as an example, in his orchard. And there's a number of different crops that are tied in there for GDD on the WSU weather site. So hopefully I've relatively answered your question directly, but happy to talk with it more afterwards.
I did want to add one thing, though, and to talk about incrementalism. So when you think about boiling the ocean and going after all the sensors and scanning and that kind of thing, there's a concept we work a lot around incrementalism to say year one, we're only going to invest in X, right? But being able to invest in things that build over time, a thing we work on, for example, is around evapotranspiration, and saying if year one is rolling out weather moisture sensors, year two is about how do I automate calculating ET and being able to then cycle that back. Year three is automated pump controls. Year four is my evapotranspiration calculations control my pump controls using water moisture sensors. By year four, it's all fully automated in a virtuous cycle. The point is that when you make these investments to say, if year one I'm investing X and I'm only going to invest so much, is it something that adds to and incrementally gets better over time? It's like the compound interest of innovation, right, when it comes to farming. Because your budgets are only so much, right? You can't go out, get all the sensors and gears and gizmos and that sort of thing. But if you think about your investment as a 10-year period, and every year I'm compounding the benefit by adding more to it, and it gets more and more beneficial over time, you have a competitive moat over other suppliers or other growers because you've made that incremental investment over time. And it could be something a 30 or 40-year period, and farms that invest a little bit each year saying, I can only do X and that's fine, I'm going to get benefit from it. But having a roadmap to say, as I and continue to make these investments over a period of time, that's really where it starts to get interesting. So wouldn't want to come off in something like this, say you got to do it all at once, boil the ocean. But thinking about how do I do a little bit each year to build up to something is an important concept to take.
With the weather stations, I want to add too, so it's the research station in Mount Vernon that we worked with. And in addition to those two that were put in, Snohomish County also paid to have two more put in addition to those, one in Stanwood in the Port Susan area, and then another one in Sultan. And our plan is to complete the two river valleys. WSU Law has created and Doug, you might be able to create me a micronet of where all of the different stations would go within the two river valleys. So our plan is that Snohomish County will install 10 more of these weather stations within the ag community down there so that we get a really good picture. And we're funding all of it through our surface water management and floodplains by design, because these weather stations and the amount of water that is used because of the information they now have really ties right back to salmon habitat and making sure that we're not using any more water than we need to, which is what they found out with Nate's farm is you're putting water on, which is what we all do. You know, we go out there and we kick the dirt, and it looks dry, better put some water on it. So having this information for all of these farmers in both valleys is going to make a big difference. Was there one more question? Did I see? Oh, two more questions. She was first.
As far as like the infrastructure piece, you're talking about having spotty cell coverage. So was that part of the investments that were made? Is there infrastructure that was built up in order to move all of that data?
Yeah, you go ahead with that because that's a lot.
So the question was there infrastructure investment to help solve or create, I'll say, the enablement of these kinds of solutions being developed? And I'll say the farm that we've created, we've outfitted it with infrastructure that is modern infrastructure that supports what we call edge computing capabilities on 5G. What we're using the lab for is to learn and understand what are the types of applications that can be built using that technology. How will that be delivered in terms of creating value for a farmer like Nate? And then ultimately that's going in and informing companies like Microsoft and T-Mobile and Dell and Intel as they think about how can they actually scale out that infrastructure and make it much more widely available. Part of the problem with it is that the farms like Nate's or even in Eastern Washington, there hasn't been an economic model of value creation that actually drives a business case for carriers to expand that coverage out, right? Most of the coverage that's been done on, say, rural areas is based upon the population that exists in a town like Prosser, not in the farms that surround Prosser. So it's been built to support consumer applications, not enterprise applications in those rural areas. And so part of what we're doing with the lab is taking information about the types of things that could be enabled and feeding that back into those companies so that they can think about the future. This is not something that's going to be solved overnight, right? This is not a problem that will be solved overnight by these companies, but they're using the environment to learn as much about what the potential is and the possibility is for extending this infrastructure out at a scalable way. The story I always like to use is that Steve, right, it still today actually has a server in a mobile unit that he uses to process all this data that he's collecting, right? That is not a scalable model for Steve at this particular point, right? And so this is a long-term play in terms of this technology being deployed at a scalable way. The nice thing about it is that there are people like Steve who are making uses of other things to deliver the value today, but part of this is about informing the future of where this infrastructure can go.
And you had a question right here.
Yeah, the moisture monitoring tools sounds really awesome, really applicable, and some of that other stuff, the ground mapping nutrients, I think that's all awesome. Is there anything else that you guys are like envisioning having monitoring services for, like pest monitoring or anything?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the question was, look, we've got the foundation in terms of mapping the soil, nutrients, texture, certainly moisture. What's next? Well, first, we believe those are the foundational pieces, right? And we've done some work. In fact, we have out at Nate's farm done drone mapping as well to show stress using NDVI indexes and so on and so forth. That's an area that we've done some work. I would say for the most part, for Innovate anyway, we are focused on showing the relationship between the soil, both on texture and nutrient, weather, and ultimately the yield, particularly in orchards and vineyards, is predominantly been our focus. Bit of drone imagery in there as some of it, as well as satellite imagery. I think the interesting thing about, maybe Kurt can speak briefly to some of the other folks that are in the 5G Open Innovation Lab that are doing some work in greenhouses, for instance, as well.
Yeah, so one of the people you may have seen in the video was Adam from a company called Unu, who's doing verticalized farming in greenhouse. And what they're using is AI and visualization. So it's all cameras that are capturing every step of that process and using that information to streamline processes for indoor growing, again. So that's another application of the data. Now, the nice thing about it is that you could take those locations and put them in places that you have coverage and access to technology. So they're able to take advantage of some of the more modern technologies in terms of AI and data visualization at a different scale than, say, someone, Steve, or doesn't have this kind of connectivity or compute capabilities that need to be enabled for the long term. And so there's certainly some applications of technology that are being done in vertical or indoor growing as well.
And I think
it's important too. I want to just, you don't need like what Steve does here. I don't know if it was answered one of the questions there, but you don't need a big cell tower, like what the big data center. Like you don't need that for the stuff that he offers. You don't need that. So I think that was one of the things that we need to say too. But like it's all done on my cell phone. So it's you don't need the big data system for the soil moisture sensors and the having those weather station stuff. So yeah.
And you can get creative if you have to. Farming, is farming about creativity? Yeah, you guys are the most creative group in here. You can use Bluetooth, for instance, to get data off of soil moisture sensors if you need to. I mean, there's creative, and Kurt earlier mentioned we've built a mobile ag data center, which is basically just a retrofit trailer that's got equipment in it to process the data. It's all about getting creative, as long as there's the economic benefit and time return for everybody involved. It's all about looking at it and seeing how we can help you.
Everyone can start somewhere, and so there isn't so much, like I was mentioning earlier, a certain amount of investment you have to make or whatever else. Where you're at, involving your use of access databases, putting it online, leveraging a BI tool, leveraging mobile technology, or driving yourself around in the truck if you don't have autonomous ATVs. I mean, a lot of this stuff serves a purpose, but if you're getting that benefit, you're getting that return, you're making that incremental investment, you're moving the ball forward around ag tech and leveraging what that is. So if you don't have connectivity, there's ways around connectivity. If you don't have a huge budget, there's ways to do it, inexpensively. And so the goal is not to necessarily create a lot of tech burden or whatever, saying, I got to make all these infrastructure investments and set up towers and that sort of thing. Kind of where you're at, moving the needle forward, getting a benefit, and then building on that over time is the focus. And as more folks invest in technology over a period of time, if one person's putting up a tower, it goes 3 miles, it's 3-mile radius, everyone can benefit from, right? A lot of it, tech co-ops, putting investments together as farmers and being able to invest collectively on a certain piece of technology and investment. As long as everyone has that focus and emphasis, leveraging initiatives like this to take advantage of it, rising tides raise all ships, so.
Yeah, the long play is the infrastructure, right? And those kinds of investments that these technology companies need to learn, right? And so part of what we built this lab for in this environment is to inform them for the long term so that the long-term blockers get removed for the scale and for the growth and the application of these things at a broad scale.
We've kept you over time, sorry. I think that one of the key things to note here is that what they have created are 2 farms that are, I call it the playground for toys. So they have other companies that have prototypes, basically, and I'm probably saying it wrong, of new technology for agriculture. And they will bring these new toys out to the farm, and they will experiment with them. They will try them in real life. And so it creates a space for these companies to bring these things out. So we've got Nate's farm and we've got Andrew's farm, and they have the 5G there now. They have the capability to use it. So now all this new technology will start coming in. Keeping in mind, we're less than a year old. But what's been done already is amazing to get that much done. So it'll be really exciting to see what's the next thing to come in. And what they're telling me about is really exciting. So you guys will have to keep up with it, check back in with us, and there's going to be some really fun stuff. So thank you for coming today.
We could even do down toward the Nate.
Maybe that's the central one.
Yeah.